So what if the most infamous biblical story about sexual sin wasn't actually about sex at all?
Welcome to this week's summary and podcast about last week's episode.
So this brings a conversation from ancient Middle Eastern deserts right into the immediate emotional reality of the modern day.
Yeah, because Hein takes this ancient concept of the sin of Sodom, this societal demand that strangers know their place, and applies it directly to the modern church experience.
Specifically for LGBTQ plus individuals today.
Right. He draws a direct parallel between the town plaza of ancient Sodom and modern religious spaces.
In the ancient story, the men of Sodom wanted the visitors to know they were inferior outsiders.
And today, Hein argues, churches often tell gay people that they are welcome, but it comes with a really heavy unspoken caveat.
They are essentially told to know their place. They're allowed inside the building, but they must behave in a way that completely hides who they really are.
Right. No hand-holding, no visible affection. It creates this environment of conditional acceptance.
You know, it sounds incredibly similar to a freemium model in software.
A freemium model.
Yeah, think about it. You are allowed to download the app for free, and you can walk right through the digital front door.
Oh, I see where you're going.
But if you actually want to access the core features of the community, like belonging, participation, leadership, all of that is locked behind a heavy paywall of behavioral compliance.
That's a great analogy. You are only truly welcome as long as you suppress your own identity.
Right. It captures the distinction Hein makes between being welcome and actually being safe.
And Bobby shares a personal story in the audio that makes this abstract concept just devastatingly real.
Yeah, the story about Bloemfontein and Klerksdorp.
Right. He shares that he and his husband had this beautiful, inclusive experience in Bloemfontein. They were actually the very first male couple to be married in front of the pulpit
In the Dutch Reformed Church in South Africa, which is the NG Kerk.
in Reverend Hein's specific congregation.
Which is a beautiful moment of genuine inclusion and safety.
But then, life moved them to a different city, Klerksdorp. They joined a church there because they wanted to remain part of a faith community.
And initially they were told they were welcome, right?
They were. But it was framed under the guise of being sinners like everyone else.
Oh.
But they managed to find some safety there, mostly because it was entirely dependent on a specific supportive minister.
But then that minister left.
Exactly. The moment that minister left the congregation, the true cultural undercurrent of the community revealed itself.
Bobby and his husband quickly found out that they were no longer safe.
They experienced exactly what Hein described. Being allowed on the plaza, but facing hostility the absolute second their protector was gone.
During this part of the conversation, Bobby makes an observation about modern intimacy that I found incredibly poignant.
About the cell phones.
Yes. He points out that everyone is constantly on their phones, answering messages, staring at screens all day long.
Right, it's a reality that makes genuine connection increasingly rare.
But Bobby notes that the church service is one of the very few places left in modern society where people collectively put their phones away.
For an hour, the screens are just down.
Exactly. It operates as this quiet, contemplative space where couples can just sit near each other. A husband and wife can hold hands during a prayer, or someone can just rest their head on their partner's shoulder.
It's a very simple, quiet intimacy.
Right. And Bobby argues that denying that exact same simple intimacy to a gay couple sitting in the pew is a profound injustice.
It really is. It strips away their basic humanity in one of the only spaces specifically designed for spiritual and communal connection.
So when confronting dynamics like this in a religious setting, the conversation naturally turns to the ultimate authority figure for the faith. Right. In any theological debate of this magnitude, both sides eventually look to the founder to see how he weighed in on the issue.
And Bobby brings up an argument frequently used by those advocating for LGBTQ plus inclusion. The argument points out that Jesus never said a single word about being gay.
The logic follows that if same-sex relationships were the ultimate sin that some modern institutions make them out to be, surely Jesus would have made it a core, explicit part of his earthly teachings.
Right. It is an argument based on textual silence.
Yeah.
But the sources highlight a much more active piece of evidence.
Jesus actually did speak explicitly about Sodom.
He did.
And if the goal was to codify sexual ethics for future generations, referencing the town of Sodom would have been the absolute perfect, most obvious time for Jesus to lay down the law.
The opportunity was teed up perfectly for him.
So what does he say?
Well, when Jesus references Sodom, specifically in the Gospel of Luke, when he is sending out his 70 messengers to various towns, He ties the legacy of Sodom entirely back to that ancient concept of hospitality.
He doesn't mention sexual orientation at all.
Not once. He warns that towns which reject his messengers, towns that refuse to welcome vulnerable strangers seeking shelter, will face a fate worse than Sodom.
Wow. He frames the entire legacy of the city around how a community treats the outsider knocking on their door.
Exactly. From Hein's perspective, this explicitly affirms his argument from the Old Testament text.
By synthesizing all of these elements, the character of God established on Mount Sinai, the harsh survival realities of ancient hospitality, the complex legal history, and the explicit teachings of Jesus, Hein arrives at his final conclusion.
He states that a responsible, deep reading of the text absolutely demands love, grace, and protection for the vulnerable.
And at the end of the audio, Hein makes a very revealing statement about his 20-year journey.
Yeah, he says that he has essentially stopped trying to win theological arguments with the institutional church hierarchy.
For him, the priority has just completely shifted.
It has. He says it is far more important that marginalized individuals like the gay youth sitting quietly in the pews know in their hearts that they are loved and that they are safe.
Rather than waiting decades for the slow wheels of church bureaucracy to finally validate their existence.
Exactly. Hein's focus moves away from proving a point about ancient history and towards practicing the very hospitality that the city of Sodom lacked. He is trying to build a safe harbor in real time.
Let's just look at the ground we've covered today. We started with a father's protective instinct for his daughter, which ignited a 2-decade pushback against the lazy reading of sacred texts.
We explored how the infamous sin of Sodom might never have been about sexual orientation at all, but rather a story condemning violent inhospitality and the systemic subjugation of strangers.
We examined how legal definitions were slowly narrowed over centuries by those in power to target specific groups.
And we grounded all of that ancient history and Roman law in the deeply human modern reality of two men just wanting the freedom to hold hands in a quiet room.
Seeking safety in a space that offers conditional welcome, but often lacks true protection. Unpacking these sources completely changes how you view the written-in-stone narratives we inherit.
It really does.
And it leaves me with a final thought for you to mull over as you go about your day. Building on the research and the lived experiences that Reverend Hein and Bobby shared, if the actual historical sin of Sodom was the hostile, violent rejection of vulnerable strangers who were merely seeking shelter and safety, how might our modern society be committing the sin of Sodom every single day?
I mean, that is a question that requires us to look outward. It moves the lens away from individual relationships and points it directly at our collective behavior.
Exactly.
Mock the vulnerable outsider on social media.
Or when we demand that marginalized people know their place before we afford them basic human dignity, are we the ones repeating the true history of that ancient, ruined city?
It makes you wonder.
Because as we've seen today, sometimes the ancient texts we think are written in stone are actually mirrors, asking us to look very closely at who we are right now.
That's it for this week. God bless.